ignore customers and their feedback at your peril. Like that, you will not succeed if you're not listening and responding to your customers. The other thing, though, I'd say about user testing in general is to be sure to look for broad patterns. So one of the things that I see sometimes in companies is they'll listen to power users or the loudest user. And what you really want to do is aggregate feedback from across your customer base.
Welcome to the Human Insight Podcast, where we share with you the business stories, ideas, and trends shaping the future of customer experience, told firsthand by the experts themselves in thought-provoking conversations.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Human Insight Podcast. If you could ask an alien from outer space one question, what would it be? Last week, the U.S. Congress held its first hearing on UFOs in 50 years. At the hearing, a Navy intelligence official told lawmakers there was no evidence of aliens. However, a database of reports of UFOs now includes about 400 incidents, up from 143 assessed in the same report released about a year ago. For this week's Insight segment, where we get your feedback on a range of topics, from current news and trends to how teams are using insights to improve their customer experiences, we asked folks from around the world what they would ask an alien if they could only ask one question. Here's what they said.
If I had one question to ask someone from another planet or solar system, what would it be? One question to ask someone from another planet. Oh, that's a tough one. I would ask them from another planet. I would be curious to know on their planet or their solar system, do they live the way that we do on Earth? Do they, use cars? Are they having global warming issues? Kind of learn from them.
Like, do they want to be our friends?
Maybe I'll ask, how is your planet? Is that good to live? Maybe we could pay a visit there.
I would ask them questions to see the differences and similarities that might exist on their planet or solar system. Example, is there water?
How is their culture like? Yeah, if I could go with them.
Where do you come from? That's one, or other could be, how did you get in here?
As for my profession, I am a physician doctor, and I'm working in a hospital. And if I were to ask one question, I would definitely ask about their body.
I think I would like to know if they have a currency there, or if they have like education, because you will wonder how will they create their own spaceship, and how do they like protect each other or cure any disease, because that's what we have right now. There's a pandemic, and then there's a lot of things going on. Also, how do they care about their planet? So
I suppose like a good question for our time would be, have you figured out how to live in harmony as a single species? And if so, how was that figured out? Like, was it because I suppose that's a fairly okay question to ask aliens.
One of my initial thoughts was that everyone took time to thoughtfully answer the question, and that most questions were related to better understanding aliens as beings, not only about how they believe they compare themselves to humans, but also around their thoughts and perspectives on how to fix some of the biggest challenges we have here on Earth. It was equally interesting to hear what our contributors are thinking about these days too, such as resolving the pandemic, environmental challenges, getting along with one another, even though we all have differences. What question would you ask? Now, on to our interview. Hi, everyone. I'm Janelle Estes, Chief Insights Officer at UserTesting, and today we're very excited to have Bobbie Wood joining us on the Human Insight podcast. Bobbie is the founder and CEO of UX Content Collective, where she provides online courses in UX writing to designers, transitioning writers, and recent college grads. She is also the former head of UX content strategy for Google Payments and Google Assistant transactions. Thanks so much for joining us today, Bobbie, and welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Janelle. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. So can you tell us a little bit more about yourself, UX Content Collective, and what's keeping you up at night these days?
Wow. Okay, so that's a lot of questions all packed into one. I grew up in Cupertino, so I'm kind of like a Silicon Valley native, and I've kind of grown up almost with Apple. It was down the road, the first Apple building. So I feel like I've grown up just immersed in technology, and I started working in tech companies. Writing was my gig, and I started out as a tech writer and then eventually moved my way into design and UX writing, and eventually worked at Google, led teams there for content, and then started my own company, which is UX Content Collective. The mission there is to, really our goal is to teach humans and computers how to talk to each other best. And our job with designing an interface is to make sure that the data inputs that users bring come back with the best results from the server or the software that they're using. And that's a very simple way to describe what's actually a very complex interaction or set of interactions. So that's what the company focuses on. What keeps me up at night? I think the speed and rate of change of technology is crazy. So, I think we're in a period of hyper growth on the technology side, and that's something that is sort of going to manifest over the next 5 or 10 years in interesting ways, I think.
Do you think most companies inherently understand the value of having good content, good writing, and vetting design with actual humans?
I do. The smart ones and the successful ones, at least, right? You ignore your customer and your research at your own peril. And these days, UX has very much proven its return on investment. Like the value is very clear. Companies who listen to customers and respond to customers and build for customers to solve problems are really the ones that are succeeding.
So, one of the areas around content and UX that I think has always been important, but seems to be a bit more in the limelight these days, and I don't even know if that's the right word to use, but this notion of making sure that whatever experience that you provide is inclusive of everyone, is accessible, and is generally built in a way where everyone feels like the experience has been created with them in mind. So how do you think about that for writing? I think that translates fairly well to design, if you will. But what's the connection between those important principles and UX content strategy and writing and copywriting?
That's a really interesting question. So having worked, everywhere from tiny little startups, including my own, to gigantic companies like Google, where you have a customer base of billions, which is literally kind of mind-blowing when you're doing that work. There's very much a tension between using, low-key, informal colloquialisms and like really connecting to people through colloquial language versus using universal plain language. And that tension is something that we can sometimes mitigate with good localization or translation practices. So, for example, if we make a joke in American English, we might be able to translate or localize that joke to German or, Canadian English, or, even some sub variations of English that we see in regional areas, which is fascinating to me to figure out where is that happy path that runs between those, that answers to that tension and serves both the giant audience and the very specific audience.
I guess when you think about sort of what you just shared around making sure content is approachable and accessible and clear, like what are the ways to make sure that that's actually happening? Like if I'm a writer and I want to get something out into the world, whether it's through my company's website or maybe some other way that I'm communicating, like how do you and I guess for lack of a better word, how do you user test it?
How do you test it? Oh my gosh. So that is that's a hard question. So there are comprehension tests like cloze testing, CLOZE. And I know, of course, you know all about this, Janelle, because you're at UserTesting. But there are comprehension tests that you can use, and even basic usability testing is absolutely key. One of the things I always teach when I'm talking about usability testing is that when your user stops talking, that's when you start listening. So when that user has stopped talking, they've probably got that, the hamster wheel is turning in their head and they're trying to figure out what the heck they're reading, they're trying to process. And so to understand, whether or not your words are simple enough, your sentences are short enough, your instructions are clear and almost obvious, right? We want them to be so obvious that the user almost doesn't remember reading them. So if the user stops and you've hit a wall of silence, that's when to ask the user, okay, what's going on now? Something's happening. You're not understanding. Your expectation didn't match. What happened? You're not sure what your next right action should be.
Do you think that in addition to listening, and I love that tip of when they stop talking, you start listening. Do you think that people are good at recognizing when writing is just too complicated? Or I guess the question is when you're testing this type of content, you can observe and listen and watch for maybe places where people see things that are too complex and are hard to understand. Are they also good at saying things like, this is really complicated? Or do people tend to be more like kind of pretend they understand what it means because they don't want to look like they don't?
That's a really interesting question, Janelle. There's because we know people have huge ranges in their personality. They have huge ranges in reactions.
Yeah.
So, if somebody feels like it's their fault that they don't understand, they might start apologizing, right? And so then you're like, oh, no, it's not your fault. It's on us. We have to write it better. Or you might have, somebody who gets a little angry or agitated or frustrated, like, this doesn't make sense. So I don't think you ever can sort of gauge those human reactions and map them as like, one-to-one for reactions to complexity. Even the reactions to complexity are complex.
Yeah, no, it's a really great point. Humans are all so different. And your point around the range, right? It's our job to recognize
yes,
how the emotion tracks to what the challenge is or what the issue is.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So you started Content Collective in 2018. Is that correct?
Yeah, we were tinkering around in 2018 and we launched in 2019. Yes, and ever since, it's been a ride and a journey. It's been super fun. For me, going from sort of managing within large companies to running my own company boy, you get called out on all the things you thought everybody else should do, and now it's on you to do it. Yeah, so
I can imagine that.
yeah, it's been fun.
So what are some of your most popular courses that people take or lessons?
So our flagship course, if we were going to call one of them a flagship course, is our UX Writing Fundamentals course. Interestingly, that was the first course that we started with. I was going to write a book, and then I thought to myself, who wants another book? What people need is hands-on practice and feedback about what they're writing and what they're learning. And so I was very excited to deliver it as an online course instead of a book.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and the course has been very successful. Our clients, are ServiceNow, Intuit, Boomi, Shopify, Uber, Wells Fargo, Thomson Reuters, Electronic Arts. Like, we just have this really impressive, to me. I feel very proud of our client list. And, those tend to be like a few people from those companies because there are so few content designers. But it's fun to me that we're out there kind of teaching the industry how to do it best.
Yeah, those are some great logos. And to imagine that you're influencing customer experiences that impact millions, billions of people. It's special.
It is.
Yeah.
It's really fun. Yeah.
So speaking of content designers and content writers, when employees or employers, companies, teams looking to hire somebody as a content strategist, what are they typically looking for? Like, what makes a good UX content strategist or writer?
So an interesting thing that is actually hard to teach, speaking of online learning and teaching, it's very hard to teach what UX writers are absolutely best at. And that is both looking at content and narrative on a macro level. So sort of looking at storytelling and cohesiveness between products or between devices or interaction modes. And then the other side of the coin for UX writing is zooming all the way into specific word choice and little tiny microcopy. So, you've got this marriage of broad content strategy with tiny structured word choice and essential communication. So I love that part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Macro and micro.
I love that. It's like a really nice visualization too, thinking sort of like thinking big picture, like you said, across channels or experiences or products, and then down into the tiny little word choices that seem tiny, but actually are really
have huge impact, right? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. I remember the notion of microcopy and even, testing different calls to action, for example, to see like which one is actually going to drive more engagement. We actually had customers that have, before they've actually gone live with a design, before they A/B test, like in some cases, they'll have 2 or 3 options that they'll put out. The design will be exactly the same. The interaction is exactly the same. The only thing that's different is the word that they use on the button.
Yes.
And what they do is they put like 8 versions of it through user testing, or at least get initial feedback from people to say, okay, which ones are people gravitating towards the most, or which ones are resonating the most? So when we do push them out to A/B, that these are the best 2 or 3 out of the 18 that we're thinking of, because there's no shortage of options.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is that testing is always compelling and interesting and fun, but it can't stop there, right? So once your user clicks through on that, the button that created the highest level of engagement, did that button also keep the user moving forward through the next 3 screens, right? So like that one isolated interaction, you might be like, yes, we have a winner. We know the words, the key words, but it's really, the testing has to continue through the whole experience so that you really understand the flow and the success of the task completion. So to me, I love the idea of testing those little isolated word choices, but it's really about usability in general. So it should always be kind of through that lens.
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of keeping your promise, if you will.
Yes, absolutely.
Once somebody clicks on something, yeah, is it what they expect? Doesn't meet, or is it what they thought it was going to be when they read
Yeah.
that
Does
call
it
to
meet their
action?
expectation? That's right. And does it continue to meet that expectation as they move forward?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So I think it's interesting, talking about the skills of great UX content strategists and writers, sort of the macro lens, and then also down to the micro copy, like we just talked about. It makes me think about a recent Q&A that you did around how AI will impact UX writing. And
Oh, wow. Yeah.
yeah, do you want to give your quick view on that? And then we solicited feedback from UX writers and content writers from around the world asking their thoughts about AI and their careers. And I wanted to watch them with you and get your reactions. But before we do that, what can you kind of summarize for listeners your thoughts on how AI will impact UX writing?
Wow. Okay. So that's a big question that I might have 5 different answers for. I think a lot of it is TBD, and what I mean by that is that we're now in this kind of nascent phase where we're trying to understand what AI is capable of, and what it's capable of is hugely powerful. It's blown past our 10 years ago idea of what a Turing test might involve. So computers, AI, can already sound like a human, like it easily can pass itself off as being a person. And the question is it smart enough to sustain a conversation? Is it smart enough to adapt when it's given guidance from a human? And sort of, when we think of AI now, these language models are very sophisticated and they're trained on these massive training bodies of training data. And so they can imitate human communication quite well, but there are a lot of nuances to human communication that it cannot address yet. And it'll probably get there. So, the interesting thing is on the TBD is what direction will it go, and who's directing it, and who's teaching it, right? These are all big questions today.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's generally and so important for the writing piece, but generally also in AI, sort of like it really is so dependent on who
Yeah,
is
yes,
actually building the model and the input
right,
that we're getting from different places.
right.
That is something. When I asked you what keeps you up at night, that's one of the things that keeps me up at night.
Yes.
I don't know if you've ever watched, gosh, I'm not going to be able to remember the name of the show, but it's on Netflix and it's all about the models behind the training models and who's influencing these algorithms.
I have not watched that, Janelle, but I would love to watch that. That sounds
Yeah,
really
let me
interesting.
pull it up. And
I'm a huge sci-fi fan, and so I love to sort of understand. And sci-fi has really informed our direction, our cultural direction, in so many ways, right? Like sci-fi writers wrote about going to space long before we went to space, and it's just interesting the way they put the ideas out there, and then sometimes they do become reality. Not so much, we hope, on the Black Mirror vision.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's called Coded Bias. It's
Awesome.
It's funny. This woman, I actually saw her speak at a conference in Boston. It was a very small conference. And when I heard her speak, I was so captivated. Her name's Joy Boylamoini, and she's an MIT Media Lab researcher. And I was so captivated by her talk. And I was thinking in my head, this woman is amazing. Like she is like approaching a topic that I think sometimes we're even too scared to explore on our own.
Yes.
now I see her Netflix special. I'm like, oh, wow. Yeah. So I'm thrilled for the attention and the spotlight that's being put on this.
Yeah. It's interesting because right now I think people, and I mean like, the general population feels very much like it's still 25 years out. And in fact, it might be 3 to 5 years out, and
Right.
these huge.
And some of this tech is already deployed.
Yes,
Like,
absolutely. Yeah. So when we look at predictive text, GPT-3 right now is outstanding at predictive text. So, as a quick example, somebody in my family had a surgery recently, and it was performed laparoscopically. And they sent a family email, sort of updating everybody. Oh, the surgery went well. And I started to write back, oh, I'm so happy that, and the predictive text said that I'm so happy that the surgery was less invasive.
oh, wow.
Yeah. And I was about to write that, but it popped in there before I even started really typing anything that would indicate that that's what I was going to say.
Wow.
So the predictive capabilities are, you could say they're delightful and astounding and fun, or you could say they're a little bit terrifying. And what does it mean? And it sort of makes us question, like, where is that going? And, what's next for that? So will it start reading our emotions and, speaking to us based on our cameras and our facial expressions, or even the set of words that we use to communicate something? It can pull out an emotional sentiment from that and respond to us.
And then provide the predictive text
Yes.
based on that. Yeah, it's fascinating. It's such an interesting topic.
It is. It's wild.
Yeah, it is wild. That's a really good word for it.
Yeah.
So as I mentioned, we did solicit some feedback from UX writers and content writers around the world, asking them their thoughts around AI and their careers as writers. And so
Right.
I want to play a couple of clips. The first one is really around whether or not they felt that AI and robots would take over their jobs. And so let's watch this together.
So step 3, it says, do you think AI will replace your job? If so, why? When? If not, why not? Oh, wow. No, I don't think so.
AI could certainly replace my job, not in the near future, though. I contribute to a bulletin that gets released twice a week, and I think that a human touch is best there, whereas if I think of AI doing it, I think it would just be straightforward facts and it wouldn't read well.
So I am a lead user researcher. Will AI replace my job? Yes. There are already elements of it that is doing my job for me, such as tagging and transcribing. But you need a human, I would argue, to kind of situate and think about what lens the research is being done by. But
I'm a big believer in AI taking over almost all jobs. At a certain point, I do think eventually AI will take over my job as well. It's not really a big fear of mine because there's always be some kind of work, and it's not too big of a deal because there's always someone supervising the AI.
I like to think of I have a little bit more personality than AI, so I could see AI taking over very basic tasks that I honestly don't even want to do, but I don't think it could ever take over my whole entire job.
AI will definitely replace some parts of my job in the mid to near future.
I don't foresee a bot being able to strategize and take in research and do that, but who knows?
The only part that couldn't be done, at least at this point, is when I, do customer interviews, interview people in my company to kind of gather that like primary intelligence that kind of goes into writing content.
I'm also responsible for having soft skills, the human touch of interaction with clients and teams within my company. I don't think that kind of work can be replaced by AI in the near future. Not as long as I'm alive.
My hilarious response to that is to quote Elon Musk from that famous South by Southwest interview where he said, "Fools about everybody who thought AI was not going to take over the world, or take over their jobs." AI will do amazing things in the future if we allow it to, and if we build it to do that. So that's one of the huge TBDs that we're dealing with AI is how will we manage it going forward? And will companies decide that AI is the best route, or will they stick with humans to do jobs because humans like work and like to be busy and like to have value? So these are huge questions, culturally huge. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, with writing, I also think about even UX research and the analysis that goes on behind the scenes, right?
Yes.
When you were saying your example of, somebody might seem frustrated or when they're reading something complex, or somebody might start apologizing like, oh, I should know what this means. Like, it takes somebody to analyze that situation to say, oh, they're saying that because this is too complex for them, or they're acting this way because of that. And I think there's like kind of some interesting parallels there between, that takes a person to objectively evaluate the situation. And same thing with writing. I think it takes a person to sit down and think about the macro strategy that we were talking about, the micro strategy, and like, does AI ever get to a place where it can do that work, or maybe even guide it?
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, I think it's TBD and a really interesting topic to think about.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah. So back to the clips. In this second one, we asked, what advantages do you think humans have over AI when it comes to writing?
What advantages do you think humans have over AI when it comes to writing? Just having like a soul, really. You have to have like a soul to be able to come up with different forms of writing, different patterns, different love, like loving in writing,
I think tone. Getting the right tone and sentiment across is probably the advantage at this point that I would think that a human would have over writing.
Anything to do with creativity, in my view, comes from a source. You can call it the divine or the universe or energy or frequency. It's a spark, and that, I would argue, cannot be replicated.
You have more pizzazz, you have more zest, you have more personality, you're more lively, literally.
I mean, I don't doubt that AIs can probably do simple things like box standard things, but if you really want something that feels truly, let's say, human, then I think that an algorithm will not be able to replicate this to a proper extent anytime soon.
So, like I mentioned before, I think the whole aspect of emotion is very important when it comes to writing, the whole aspect of relatability with other humans. When I'm writing something, I need to know my audience. I need to know, I mean, anyone can write content, but will the audience really relate? It's the words you use, the way you use the words, the way you put things, the way you weave a story. That's very important. Up until 2 years ago, I thought that could never be replicated by AI, but a few months back, during some projects, I came across an AI that not only replicated emotion through speech, but it also replicated emotions in writing, and I was captivated. And that scared me, that really scared me. So humans definitely have the advantage of understanding other humans, but somewhere it feels like AI is catching up, and it's scary.
So, Bobbie, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, this is interesting because there's something about people answering this question that just sparks such love in my heart. I don't even know how to describe it, but we as people, we understand that when someone references a soul or a spark or empathy or emotion, this is what makes us human, and it's what AI will never substitute for. So we will always seek that connection. So whether AI is capable of imitating that and in a satisfying way is really the question that remains to be seen. So I can tell you I have directly observed things like an AI voice calling a person and having a conversation with them. The person would never know that it was not a human. The AI is capable, and this was at Google, the AI is capable of responding in very human-like manners, down to little like voice fluctuations or like little, funny little grunts or breaths, that you wouldn't expect to come from an AI, but which we're used to hearing as human cues to emotion. And so I think that humans will always seek humans, and that's something we'll never get around. So that part I think is.
I think you're right, especially in situations where it's an emotionally charged discussion or something that requires a level of empathy from another human being. Maybe we get there someday, or maybe it's just more guided. I think it's Humana, which is a medical provider, insurance company, something along those lines. I probably should know the definition of that before I share the story, but in their call center, they actually have real-time sentiment analysis that sits on top of what the caller is saying.
Yes.
And then it actually provides suggestions to the call center rep on how to respond.
Right.
And I find that really interesting and fascinating and super helpful, right? For people who might not be able to completely extract the context or the emotion from the caller. That was my take on it. What do you think?
I have mixed feelings about that. We all have, we've all dealt with an AI that isn't responding appropriately, right? So sometimes, like, what if you're being sarcastic or something and the AI misinterprets what you're trying to say? It could go wrong. The true fact is that's that layer of software that's suggesting that script and that response. You could take the human right out of that equation and just apply voice to that conversation, and the computer could handle it. The computer could deliver that script, or the AI system. So I think there is like huge risk for people to lose their jobs or not understand anymore how we fit in a workplace, or even how we operate as customers, because we've all gone into a situation where we realize we're speaking with an AI. And we're very frustrated because we just know, sort of in our hearts or, in our bodies or whatever it is, in our minds, we know that this is a machine we're talking to, and that machine doesn't care. And so no matter how much a machine tries to imitate caring, it doesn't care. And this is something that I think we can't get away from.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. And then people have figured out ways to get around that too. Like, there's nothing worse than being in a phone tree, right? And you're like, representative, or start swearing. Somebody route me to a human.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
For sure. Well, Bobbie, this has been really great. We're going to move into our lightning question round, and this is a set of questions that we ask every guest that comes on to the podcast. So what's a book that you've recently read that you'd recommend to our listeners?
So I can't recommend a book because I read a lot of like trashy sci-fi for fun. So
that works.
However, I will recommend a newsletter. I really love The Marginalian by Maria, what is her name? Maria Popov? Yeah, Popova. Sorry, Maria Popova. And it's called The Marginalian. And it is a discussion of human philosophy. It's a wonderful newsletter. It's amazing. It's been going for years. She's incredible. If you have a chance, check it out.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm definitely going to sign up for this. I'm just pulled it up on my browser. It looks really interesting.
Yeah.
Awesome. So, and then what's one piece of advice that you'd give to someone who's trying to convince others to invest in customer feedback?
I think we discussed this a little bit earlier. Ignore customers and their feedback at your peril. Like that, you will not succeed if you're not listening and responding to your customers. So, the other thing, though, I'd say about user testing in general is to be sure to look for broad patterns. So one of the things that I see sometimes in companies is they'll listen to power users or the loudest user. And what you really want to do is aggregate feedback from across your customer base.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my biggest piece of advice.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, we tend to really hear our loudest, noisiest, unhappiest customers, but you're right. Making sure that you're pulling from a good mix of your customer bases. I like that. That's great advice. And then when you think about the future of the UX industry, and in particular UX writing or UX content strategy, what are you most excited about?
Wow. So I love the idea of augmented reality and voice interaction modes. I don't love the metaverse. I don't love taking us out of reality. I don't love substituting our experiences. I do love augmenting our experiences. So that's probably what I'm most excited about, is where those interaction modes will go.
Yeah, love it. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Bobbie, on the Human Insight podcast. For listeners, go check out Bobbie's UX Content Collective. And we are a partner of yours, so I think we are featured in some of the courses as well.
Yep.
But yes, love what you're doing. I love the knowledge you're sharing. I wish every company could hire hundreds of content
Me too.
strategists and writers.
Yep. Thank you for having me, Janelle.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode. If you liked it, please share it with a friend or coworker. If you think it could have been better, let us know. Email us at podcast@usertesting.com. Thanks.